undercover owner flies in his own airline, stops cold when he hears two passengers behind him. He stepped onto the aircraft wearing old sneakers, jeans, and a zip-up sweatshirt with a faded logo near the collar. His baseball cap was tugged low over his brow, obscuring the watchful, discerning gaze that had served him well in the boardroom for over a decade. It was a look so commonplace that no one on board would have suspected his true identity. He took a moment to appreciate the familiar hum of the engines and the subtle whiff of cleaning solution that always lingered near the front of the cabin. This was his airline, after all. He had spent years negotiating deals to build it from a regional brand into a powerhouse. Yet, only a handful of people outside his inner circle even knew his face. He'd always been a private man, the kind who preferred to operate behind the scenes, letting others accept the spotlight while he guided everything from the shadows. He'd grown used to blending in, which had become a game of sorts, dress in the most understated way, appear casually disinterested, and see how employees and travelers behaved without knowing the real nature of his presence. This trip was meant to be a routine quality assessment flight. His executive team loved talking about numbers, but he believed the best perspective came from actually being there, living the passenger experience himself. So he was prepared to watch the flight attendants discreetly, see how they interacted with those who paid for first-class comfort as well as the folks in economy. He wanted to see if the service had slipped, if the seat cushions had grown too stiff, or if the in-flight menu was lacking. Data in a spreadsheet never told the full story. He found his seat in economy, near the middle of the plane, with a row that extended 3 seats across. The seat was by the aisle. He'd specifically selected it to feel out how the flight attendants handled requests for drinks, or how quickly they responded to calls. He had an unassuming carry-on bag that he hoisted into the overhead compartment, then sank into his seat with a sigh. He ran his hand over the worn armrest, ignoring a small scratch near the plastic edge, and made a mental note to bring that detail up at the next maintenance briefing. Those were the small things that often went unnoticed but meant a great deal for branding. He was just settling in when 2 passengers slid into the seats directly behind him. He could hear the shuffle of their belongings and the distinct clink of a water bottle hitting plastic. People came and went through the aisle, jostling for space as they found their seats. A flight attendant at the front greeted everyone, her voice warm and inviting, offering a practiced, well-rehearsed line of welcome as each passenger boarded. When he heard the pair behind him begin to talk, he prepared to tune them out. Passengers engaged in countless mundane conversations before takeoff, and it all became white noise. Today, however, he found himself strangely attentive. Maybe it was intuition. One of the voices belonged to a young man, maybe in his 20s, while the other was deeper, older, and wore the confident tone of someone who always needed the last word. "Don't worry," the older voice said. "They never check who you really are in these seats. They only make a fuss if you're up front. Back here, it's just you, me, and an ocean of nobodies." He frowned to himself. The words felt coarse. He'd always prided himself on wanting to treat each passenger with dignity, no matter where they were seated. He remained still, forcing himself not to turn around, suspecting that they might see him looking. Instead, he closed his eyes, pretending to doze while paying attention to every syllable. The younger voice muttered something he couldn't quite make out. Then the older voice answered, "Let's just say we got business. Big business. I can't wait to get out of here. This flight's too long for my taste, but what can you do when the boss says jump?" His interest was piqued. So was his apprehension. It was possible they were up to something unsavory, or maybe they were just boasting. Hard to say, but it made him uneasy. He settled deeper into his seat, aware that eavesdropping was typically rude, but also knowing he had a responsibility. This was his airline, and if passengers on board were planning anything disruptive or dangerous, he should know. Once everyone was seated, the engines began to roar. The recorded safety demonstration crackled over the speakers. Flight attendants started their well-orchestrated instructions: how to fasten a seatbelt where the exits were located, how to use oxygen masks. He recognized the script by heart, having heard it 100 times before. Yet, something about the tension behind him made each word in that demonstration loom with more significance. He noticed how one passenger in the row across was repeatedly raising his hand to attract a flight attendant's attention, probably wanting to stow a bag or ask a question. The man behind him said something again, presumably to the younger seatmate, but the noise of the aircraft drowned it out. The plane taxied onto the runway. His ears popped as the plane picked up speed, pressing him back against the seat. They were airborne in seconds, the comforting tilt of the wing carrying them skyward. Once the seatbelt sign flicked off, he decided to stretch his legs, maybe get a sense of those two behind him. He unbuckled, stood, and turned. The older man had a shaved head and a worn leather jacket that looked older than the day. The younger man had bleached hair and a face stuck halfway between anxious and excited. Neither looked up. The older one had a suspiciously thick folder in his lap, which he was flipping through, while the younger man was tapping anxiously on the tray table. He passed them and headed to the bathroom, adjusting his cap to ensure that half his face remained hidden. He had no desire to blow his cover. He closed the door behind him, listening to the low hum of the aircraft. As he washed his hands, he stared at his reflection in the tiny mirror. He was used to seeing that face on the covers of business magazines, typically accompanied by headlines about his savvy investments or philanthropic work. Now, nobody recognized him. Perhaps the cap and sweatshirt were working. He stepped back into the aisle and made his way slowly past the seats. The older man lifted his head for the briefest moment, meeting his eyes. There was a flicker of interest, maybe curiosity at who was walking by, but then it vanished, and he resumed rifling through those mysterious papers. Back in his seat, he tried to focus on the safety and comfort aspects of the flight, reminding himself of his purpose here. The flight attendants wheeled the drink cart down the aisle. He ordered a ginger ale, politely declining the bag of peanuts. The attendant seemed friendly enough, though perhaps a bit rushed. He would add that observation to his mental checklist. Behind him, the conversation resumed. The older man's voice was subdued, as if he was purposely trying not to be overheard. "I'm telling you, once we land, we go straight to the building. Don't talk to anybody. We do this quick, and we get out. That's what you want, right?" The younger man sighed. "Right, but are we sure it's all set? I don't want to walk into something that ends up, you know." The older man grunted. "Relax. I'm not a rookie. This is nothing new for me. You, on the other hand, gotta calm that nervous energy. People see that. They start asking questions." The owner leaned forward in his seat, tension coiling in his stomach. This wasn't typical casual conversation. It sounded like a plan, maybe even something illegal. Should he alert a flight attendant? Should he keep listening? 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind, but he kept his outward composure. Jumping to conclusions could cause unwarranted panic, but it also might be foolish to dismiss it. He decided to do what he'd done for years in business negotiations: gather more intel, remain patient, and avoid reckless moves until he had enough facts. He caught the eye of a flight attendant passing by, but she was busy offering coffee to another passenger. He watched her fluid motions, the way she politely balanced multiple requests at once. When the attendants were done, the overhead lights dimmed slightly as the flight progressed. Passengers either settled into reading, napping, or watching in-flight entertainment. He closed his eyes briefly, thinking about how his father had once told him the only way to truly understand people was to watch them when they thought no one was looking. That was the entire reason he boarded incognito. Behind him, the conversation took a turn that gripped his attention. The younger man asked softly, "Why'd we pick this airline, anyway? Could have been cheaper to take that other one." The older man chuckled. "We need to make a statement, and you know the rumor, right? This airline's got that big, philanthropic owner, some do-gooder who invests in community projects. Well, let's just say certain people want to send a message to him." The owner felt his heart jolt. They were talking about him, or at least the persona he'd built for the public. But what message exactly did they want to send? He steadied his breathing, forcing himself not to whip around. Instead, he pretended to rummage in the seat-back pocket, extracting the safety card and flipping it aimlessly. The older man continued, "If we want them to pay attention, we have to do something that hits close to home. That's what this whole job is about, making people see that we're not playing around." The younger man's reply was a hushed question. "So you're sure it's not dangerous, right? We're not talking about bombs or anything insane, right?" A low, humorless laugh. "Kid, you've got a lot to learn. We're not terrorists. We just do what's necessary to prove a point. Now stop pestering me with these questions. It's all arranged." A wave of relief mingled with continued anxiety spread through the owner. They said they weren't terrorists, but they still had some nefarious plan in mind. Could it be some form of sabotage or a threat to his corporate office? Possibly. There was no way to be certain yet. He turned his gaze to the flight attendants bustling about. One of them was nearing with a tray of food for the midday meal. He smiled and reached for the small container of chicken and rice along with a roll. She thanked him and continued on. He nearly forgot to say thanks, lost in his swirl of thoughts, but he quickly managed a polite nod. He took a few bites, his appetite nearly gone with worry. He wondered if this was a personal vendetta or something bigger, like corporate espionage. Over the years, he had stepped on more than a few toes while expanding his business. Perhaps an old enemy was orchestrating a message for him, or maybe these men were just using the flight as an example of how easy it was to get away with shady deals. He forced himself to keep chewing, to appear normal. A voice on the speaker announced that there might be turbulence ahead. Passengers were advised to remain seated and secure their seatbelts. Almost in tandem, the plane gave a slight shudder, and he felt that familiar dip in his stomach as the aircraft navigated through the rough air. For a few moments, the only sounds were hushed murmurs of concern from some passengers, the roar of the engines and the sporadic rattle of overhead compartments. He heard the older man behind him curse quietly when the turbulence jostled his folder. Papers spilled onto the floor. There was scrambling, the rustle of pages. The younger man whispered, "Hurry, pick them up before someone sees." He thought quickly. If they were that concerned about someone seeing the contents of those papers, it might be something incriminating. It might also be something like a business proposal or sensitive data. But that hush in the younger man's tone suggested something illicit. The flight smoothed out, and the fasten seatbelt sign remained lit. After a minute or two, calm returned to the cabin. A flight attendant circulated with the trash bag, collecting empty meal trays. The tension behind him remained, but the men had grown quieter, presumably because of the close call with those scattered papers. He could hear faint whispering, but not enough to piece together their exact words. A phrase drifted to his ears. "We'll let them know we're here." Then another snippet. "No one expects it from someone like us." The man realized he needed to stay sharp. Maybe, once they landed, he could discreetly alert security or local authorities to follow these two. He wanted to keep investigating, but the last thing he wanted to do was compromise the safety of everyone on board. Time passed, measured by the subtle drone of the engines and the occasional beep of the seatbelt sign turning off and on as they hit more patches of unstable air. A flight attendant announced that passengers were free to move about the cabin once again, prompting a small queue for the bathrooms. He decided to carefully glance over his shoulder, pretending to adjust his seat. The older man was leaning toward the younger, speaking so quietly the owner could only catch scraps. "Need you calm for the next part. Don't slip up once we land. Not going to repeat myself." The younger man nodded, eyes darting around, clearly on edge. Eventually, the plane's lights were dimmed for the scheduled rest period on this flight, given its length. Several passengers settled in with blankets and tiny pillows. The owner found himself lost in thought, remembering how he'd always tried to maintain impeccable security on his flights. He made sure there were thorough background checks for staff and that each flight had safety measures in place. But you can't fully control who buys a ticket. He glanced at the silver band on his left ring finger. It reminded him of what his wife had said just that morning before he left. "Be careful. Sometimes you need to trust your instincts." He'd kissed her goodbye without a hint of fear for anything that could happen in flight. Now, he felt an ominous swirl in his gut, as though danger lurked in the back row. He tried to rest, but every time he closed his eyes, fragments of that conversation replayed in his mind. The idea that they'd purposely chosen his airline to send a message wouldn't leave him alone. He wondered if they might be planning to confront him in person, or maybe they just wanted to sabotage the airline's reputation. Later, he woke from a light doze to the sound of a heated argument a few rows up. A man was complaining about being given the wrong type of meal. A flight attendant apologized, offering him a voucher for a future flight. The argument escalated momentarily, but the attendant kept calm. Meanwhile, behind him, the suspicious men didn't react at all, which somewhat surprised him. If they were troublemakers, might they not also join in some conflict to draw attention? They remained silent, perhaps not wanting any undue scrutiny. He wondered if it might be wise to quietly signal the flight attendants or even the pilot, but he had no concrete evidence beyond overheard pieces of conversation. The last thing he wanted was to cause mass panic. On the other hand, ignoring a potential threat went against all his instincts. He decided to bide his time. Maybe he could speak with one of the flight attendants he trusted, someone he knew had been with the company for years, maybe even someone who had met him at an executive function. But that approach was risky. People talk. The men behind him might catch on. The flight progressed, and eventually the final meal service began. He listened carefully to see if the men behind him gave any indication of what they planned to do upon landing. The older voice said, "You got everything you need for customs. Don't do anything that'll get us flagged." The younger voice responded, "Relax, I'm not that dumb. No weapons, no contraband. They won't find anything on me, and you know how thorough I was." It dawned on him that these two might not be messing around with simple mischief. They had deliberately chosen to avoid suspicion. That suggested a different kind of plan, something potentially large-scale, though not necessarily violent. He fiddled with the tray table latch, noticing the short nails of his right hand, a habit he'd fallen into whenever he was nervous. Finally, the pilot's voice rang through the speakers, announcing their descent. Seatbacks and tray tables were brought to their upright positions. Outside the window, a patchwork of city lights glimmered against the early evening sky, a hazy mix of oranges and yellows that signaled they were close to home. He felt the plane dip down, the landing gear thudding into place. The overhead bins rattled as the plane hit a pocket of air. Passengers braced themselves for touchdown. The men behind him grew silent. He could practically feel the tension in their seats. The moment the plane touched the runway and slowed, the cabin was filled with the usual hustle. Seatbelts unbuckling prematurely, cell phones powering on, people stretching cramped legs. He remained still, letting the wave of anxious travelers press forward. He planned to keep an eye on them as they deplaned. If he followed them discreetly, he might see where they went. He could call an airport official if something seemed amiss. The older man hissed, "Keep your hood up. Don't let them see your face too clearly. We'll do this quick." The younger man agreed. He swallowed hard. His flight had landed in one piece, but the threat wasn't over. He retrieved his carry-on, stepping into the aisle behind them. The older man had that folder tucked under one arm. The younger man clutched a small backpack. They walked briskly past the flight attendants, who offered standard farewells. The men didn't respond beyond a curt nod. As soon as he stepped onto the jet bridge, he felt the cooler air of the airport terminal. He hung back, letting a couple with a baby and a large stroller go ahead of him. The two suspicious passengers moved swiftly, weaving through the crowd. He followed, maintaining a short distance. He debated calling airport security from his phone, but decided to watch just a bit more to confirm his suspicions. He didn't want to make a formal claim without any proof of wrongdoing. So he hovered near a newsstand, feigning interest in a magazine while covertly observing the men. They headed toward the baggage claim area. He followed suit, blending in with the throng. The older man kept glancing at his phone, as if waiting for a message. The younger man looked more nervous by the second, scanning each face that passed. At baggage claim, the carousel started rotating. Travelers crowded around, each hoping to grab their suitcase first. The men stood on the far side, away from the main cluster of passengers. No one else seemed to notice them. He positioned himself behind a man reading text messages on his phone, trying to remain inconspicuous. After a few minutes, a black duffel bag appeared on the carousel. The younger man moved forward, snatching it up with an air of familiarity. He hauled it onto the ground, then joined the older man again. The older man's lips were pressed into a thin line. He seemed satisfied. They started for the exits, and the owner followed at a careful distance, attempting to look like just another weary traveler heading to ground transportation. Outside, the lights of private cars and taxis glowed through the glass. The men walked briskly, heading toward the rideshare pickup zone. He struggled with what to do. If he lost them now, he might never discover what they intended. But he could only follow for so long without being too obvious. Then, as if on cue, a black sedan pulled up. The older man opened the trunk, and the younger man hoisted the newly claimed duffel bag inside. The older man made a brief call on his phone, presumably verifying that this was indeed their ride. He stepped behind a pillar, debating his next move. Should he confront them? Approach them with some ruse? Perhaps pretend to be in the same rideshare line and eavesdrop further? At that moment, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Alarmed, he spun around, expecting a confrontation. Instead, he found one of the flight attendants, an older woman named Rosalind, who had been with the airline for years. She stared at him, recognition dawning. "Sir," she said softly, "I thought that was you on the flight. Is everything all right?" He hesitated, scanning her face. Rosalind had been loyal and discreet for over a decade. She was aware of who he was, but also understood the importance of keeping it confidential. "There may be a situation," he whispered. "Those two men over there. They were talking about something potentially dangerous. They might be targeting the airline or me personally." Her eyes widened, but she kept her composure. "I can alert airport security right now." He frowned. "I don't want them spooked. They're getting in that black sedan. If we can just get a license plate number and have security track them, that might be enough." Rosalind nodded. They both watched as the men closed the trunk and slid into the car. The older man looked over his shoulder, almost as if sensing their gaze. Quickly, the owner ducked behind Rosalind, feigning conversation. The younger man fiddled with something in the back seat. Then the sedan peeled away, merging into the flow of traffic. As it passed, Rosalind stepped forward, discreetly snapping a photo with her phone. She exhaled, turning back to him. "Got the plate. I'll call it in." He nodded, relief flooding him. "Thank you. Let's hope we can figure out what they're planning." Rosalind placed a comforting hand on his arm. "I'll do whatever you need, sir." Then she moved away, phoning the details to the head of airport security. He remained where he was, heart pounding. He replayed the scenario in his head, from the men's cryptic conversation to their tense departure. He had no direct evidence of a crime, but their words strongly suggested something was amiss. He decided that once he got home, he would gather his personal security team, alert the local authorities, and possibly even do some digging into who those men were. The next day found him in an unremarkable office just outside the main hangar of the airline's regional headquarters. This small, nondescript room functioned as his personal base whenever he visited incognito. Only his most trusted staff knew about it. The walls were lined with photographs from the early days of the airline, including one of him shaking hands with a big investor who had helped fund the expansion. Across from him sat Myra, his head of corporate security. She was flipping through a set of photographs on a tablet, her expression grave. Rosalind had sent the plate number and a brief description of the two men. Myra was running an investigation. "These men, as far as we can tell, are associates of a group that calls itself the Equal Enforcement Initiative," she said, her voice carefully measured. "A small radical group that claims big businesses are exploiting minority communities. They stage protests, sometimes borderline criminal acts, to make their point." He set down his coffee. "So, do we think they're targeting me because of alleged exploitation, or do they actually plan to do something violent?" Myra pursed her lips. "Hard to say. They're known mostly for disruption rather than outright violence. But sometimes these groups escalate. The older man might be a suspect in a few break-ins at corporate offices around the city. If so, they could be planning a sabotage, or maybe looking to publicly humiliate you. They might be trying to highlight a racial or social issue connected to your business." He sighed. "I've always prided myself on inclusive practices. My philanthropic work focuses on education, job training, and bridging racial divides in underserved communities. If they'd only done their research, they'd see I'm not the enemy." Myra shrugged. "Sometimes these groups just see you as a billionaire who must be complicit in the system. That's all they need to declare you a target." He nodded solemnly. "We need to find them before they cause real damage. Did the plate number give us anything?" Myra tapped the screen, revealing a record from the Department of Motor Vehicles. "Car's a rental, paid in cash, using fake credentials. Dead end. We'll keep searching, though." He leaned back, feeling the weight of responsibility press on him. He was determined to stop them from hurting anyone or tarnishing the airline's reputation. "Keep me posted, and let's beef up security around the corporate offices and maintenance hangars. I also want more discreet checks on the staff. They might try infiltration." Myra stood, her expression resolute. "Consider it done." Over the following days, he found himself checking daily updates from Myra's team. Whenever a flight got delayed or there was a minor incident, his mind leapt to those men, wondering if they were behind it. He also spent late nights hunched over his desk, scanning data on the so-called Equal Enforcement Initiative. The deeper he dug, the more he realized their main focus was to call out racial inequities in the hiring and labor practices of large corporations. He always believed he'd done right by his workforce. But maybe there were cracks in the system that he hadn't noticed. If these men claimed they were sending a message, maybe it had to do with pointing out flaws in his company's track record. He felt a mix of defensive pride. He had tried to do good, and a nagging fear that maybe they'd found a genuine oversight. At the same time, life didn't slow down. A new route to expand the airline overseas was in the works. meaning endless meetings with potential international partners. Shareholders wanted reassurance that everything was on track. He juggled phone calls and emails, forever mindful of that underlying threat. One evening, as he prepared to leave the office, Myra burst in, eyes gleaming with urgency. "We tracked them," she announced. "They rented a small commercial property near the industrial district. Been there about 2 days." He sprang to his feet, adrenaline rushing. "Are we calling the cops?" Myra held up a hand. "Already did. The local authorities want us to identify probable cause before they move in. They say the group's been known to occupy spaces but not necessarily break the law. We have to be careful." He paced across the room, heart pounding. "So, we need eyes on them. See what they're doing in there. I want to know if they're building bombs or printing pamphlets." Myra nodded. "Exactly. I've got a guy on it, and he's discreet. But if there's any threat of danger, the authorities will swoop in." A tense day passed, then another. Myra's discreet agent kept watch on the property from an unmarked car, occasionally snapping photos. The older man and younger man came and went, sometimes hauling crates in or out. When questioned by a curious neighbor, the older man claimed they were setting up a community outreach center. On the third day, Myra arrived at the office with a new development. She placed a file on his desk. "They've started distributing flyers, and the language is inflammatory. It accuses your airline of discriminatory hiring practices and claims you refused to invest in minority-owned businesses, among other things." He scowled, scanning the flyers. They were a twisted version of his philanthropic record, painting him as a wolf in sheep's clothing. They cited outdated data that had since been corrected. "They're basically trying to stir up trouble, make me look like a hypocrite. But so far, that's not illegal," Myra agreed. "No, but the question is, are they planning more than just a smear campaign?" That evening, he decided to pay a personal visit to the property. Myra cautioned him against it, saying it was risky, but he insisted on seeing for himself. They took an unmarked SUV, tinted windows concealing his presence. He parked on a side street, tension gripping him as he surveyed the dimly lit building. He saw a couple of young men stepping out, heading to a nearby convenience store. They wore hoodies and spoke quietly. He recognized the younger man from the plane, the bleached hair unmistakable in the glow of a street lamp. The older man didn't appear. He slipped lower in his seat. "Let's wait and see if they come back with anything." Myra kept the engine running, scanning the area for police presence or suspicious activity. The industrial district was largely deserted at this hour, a stretch of road dotted with shuttered factories and warehouses. After a while, the young men returned with a couple of bags. They re-entered the building, and the door closed behind them. He checked his watch. "I want to see if we can get a glimpse of what's inside." Myra shook her head, her voice firm. "We don't have legal grounds for that yet. If we break in or peek through windows, it could compromise any future investigation. We have to do this properly." He gritted his teeth, frustration mounting. "We can't just wait for them to strike." She softened. "I understand. But if we act too aggressively without cause, we'll be the ones in trouble." Reluctantly, he nodded. "Let's get out of here. I'll see if we can meet with a local community leader, someone who might open a dialogue. Maybe we can diffuse this situation by talking." The following day, he reached out to a respected pastor known for mediating community disputes. The man agreed to meet him. He arrived at the pastor's modest church, located in a neighborhood long plagued by underinvestment. The pastor, a tall man with a gentle smile, welcomed him into his simple office. "I've been hearing chatter about a new group in town," the pastor said, offering him a seat. "They're riling people up, claiming there's a big demonstration in the works." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I want to help address any legitimate concerns, but they're not approaching me directly. Instead, they're targeting my name, my airline, and suggesting we discriminate. That's not what I stand for. The pastor nodded sympathetically. I've heard both sides. Some folks in the community believe your airline's expansion didn't create enough jobs locally. Others believe you've done plenty of good through scholarships and outreach. The problem is, truth often gets lost in the shouting. A wave of despair washed over him. What if we hold a public forum? Provide data, show them the real numbers, and invite conversation. The pastor stroked his chin thoughtfully. That might help, but if these radicals are determined to smear you, they might not show up, or they might show up just to grandstand. He exhaled slowly. I can't just sit by. They were on my airplane talking about sending a message. That suggests something bigger, something beyond flyers and rumors. I'll do what I can, the pastor promised. Let me see if I can reach out through some contacts. Maybe we can broker a meeting. As he left the church, he couldn't shake a sense of impending confrontation. He called Myra to share the new plan. She agreed to ramp up security around his upcoming public appearances, just in case. Days passed, and the tension only grew. The men continued their activities in that rented space, though Myra's team noted no sign of bomb-making or weapon stockpiling. They seemed to be painting large banners and contacting local activists. A few local radio stations received anonymous tips about a demonstration aimed at calling out the airline's racist practices. Finally, word trickled through that the group was planning a large-scale protest at the airline's corporate headquarters. The date circled on the calendar was ominously close. Myra prepped the security team, the building staff, and the local authorities. Still, no one knew if the demonstration would be peaceful or disruptive. That morning, he arrived at headquarters early. Police barricades were already set up. A few uniformed officers milled about, chatting with security personnel. The main entrance was roped off to create a buffer zone. Employees were advised to use side entrances. Around mid-morning, a crowd began to gather on the sidewalk. Some held signs with slogans like "Stop the Exploitation" and "Racial Justice Now." Others shouted into bullhorns demanding accountability. He watched from an upper window, feeling a mix of anxiety and resolve. He spotted the older man leading a chant. The younger man handed out pamphlets. They weren't a massive crowd, maybe 30 or 40 people, but they were loud. Occasionally, passers-by slowed to see what the ruckus was about. Media vans pulled up, reporters aiming cameras at the protesters. The older man seized the spotlight, launching into accusations about how the airline refused to invest in minority neighborhoods and engaged in wage discrimination. He brandished a folder of evidence, likely the same papers he'd carried on the plane. Outrage churned in the owner's gut. He wanted to run downstairs and defend himself, but Myra cautioned restraint, reminding him that he could address the media in a controlled way. Eventually, he decided that letting rumors spread without a direct response could be equally damaging. He stepped outside into the cordoned-off area, accompanied by a couple of security guards. Cameras turned to him instantly. The older man's face registered momentary confusion. He probably hadn't expected him to show up in person. The younger man gaped, as if recognizing him from the plane but not quite believing it. Reporters surged forward, thrusting microphones in his direction. He raised a hand, signaling for calm. A hush spread through the crowd. "I understand there are concerns about my airline's business practices," he said firmly. "I'm here to listen and respond. We have data that refutes many of these claims, and we also have a record of community investment. If you have legitimate grievances, I want to hear them." The older man snorted. We know who you really are, a profiteer who hides behind philanthropy. We've got the documents to prove it." He took a measured breath, doing his best to remain composed. "If you have credible evidence of wrongdoing, I'll address it. But I won't stand by while false accusations undermine the work we've done to empower communities." A reporter jumped in with a question. "Sir, do you deny that your company has refused to hire from certain neighborhoods based on race?" He looked the reporter in the eye. "Absolutely. We do not discriminate. In fact, we actively recruit from a diverse range of communities. We offer training programs and scholarships. I can give you specifics if needed." The older man scowled, flipping through his folder. "What about the employees who've complained about unequal pay?" He bristled internally. "Any employee complaint is taken seriously. We investigate and address issues promptly. If you know of specific cases, provide their names, and we'll investigate immediately." The tension was palpable. The demonstration had grown silent, except for the hum of cameras recording every word. The crowd seemed unsure whether to continue shouting or to listen. Then, from the back of the group, a few additional protesters arrived, carrying a large banner. They tried to push forward, but the police officers blocked them. The older man didn't flinch. He raised his voice, addressing the protesters. "This is the guy who pretends to care about equality while turning a blind eye to discrimination. We won't stop until we force him to face the truth." He took one step closer, the adrenaline in his veins surging. "I'm right here facing you now. Show me your evidence, and I'll either correct a real issue or prove that your claims are baseless." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the older man's face. Perhaps he hadn't expected direct confrontation. His eyes darted to the younger man, who looked torn between supporting the cause and doubting the validity of the older man's allegations. Reporters sensed the drama unfolding. The cameras zoomed in. Everyone waited. Finally, the older man rummaged in his folder, pulling out a sheaf of papers. He thrust them toward the police line. "Go on, take a look at these," he sneered. One of the guards stepped forward, collected the papers, and handed them to the owner. He quickly scanned them. They included old financial statements, selective quotes from internal memos, and a few questionable testimonies from unnamed sources. At first glance, it looked like a patchwork of half-truths. He cleared his throat. "These documents are outdated. For instance, this memo references employee demographics from nearly a decade ago. We've changed policies and increased diversity recruitment since then." The older man barked back. "So you claim. People like you always have an excuse." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few protesters seemed unconvinced. Others just glared at him. The younger man hung back, uncertainty etched on his face. "Why not come inside?" the owner offered, "and we can show you our current records, on the condition that we maintain a civil discussion and that you stop spreading unverified accusations." The suggestion caused an uproar of competing voices. Some protesters demanded transparency. Others thought it was a trap. The older man looked offended by the invitation. "You think I'm stupid? I'm not going into your den just so you can spin your corporate lies. We want justice in the public eye, where you can't hide." He felt frustration rising, but he reminded himself to keep calm. "I'm not hiding. I'm out here talking to you, but if you want real answers, we need the facts, not just a spectacle." An awkward silence fell. Then one of the protesters, a young woman with tears in her eyes, stepped forward. "My brother applied to your airline and never heard back. He was qualified. We believe it was because of his background." He turned to her gently. "I don't know the specifics, but if you give me his name, I promise to personally follow up on his application. If there's any discrimination at play, I'll address it. If not, maybe there was another reason. like a background check issue or an incomplete application. The young woman wavered, momentarily caught off guard by his sincerity. She hesitated, then whispered her brother's name. He nodded. "Thank you. I'll have someone contact you." Cameras recorded every moment. The older man, sensing the shift, tried to regain control. "Don't be fooled by his promises. He's just trying to placate you." Before he could say anything further, the young woman turned to the older man. "I want my brother to get a fair chance. Isn't that why we're here?" The older man's expression hardened. "Yes, but not by dancing to his tune. We need systemic change, not case-by-case handouts." She stood her ground. "I'm not naive, but if he's serious, then maybe we can expose a real problem or find out there isn't one." The group started arguing among themselves. Some sided with the young woman, eager to see actual proof. Others yelled that it was all corporate spin. The older man tried to rally them back, but a fracture in the crowd's unity was evident. Sensing an opening, the owner addressed them. "I'm willing to speak with representatives you choose, people you trust. Let's gather and go through every detail. I have no problem with scrutiny, but if you're just here to stage a show, I can't help you." The older man's eyes blazed. He jabbed a finger in the owner's direction. "You think you're clever, don't you? Telling us to come inside so you can feed us lies." The owner met his gaze evenly. "I'm telling you to meet me with facts, in a place where we can talk calmly. If you refuse, maybe this protest is more about drama than change." The older man looked poised to shout another accusation, but at that moment, the younger man stepped forward, hesitantly placing a hand on the older man's shoulder. "He's offering an olive branch," he said softly. "Isn't that what we wanted?" A hush settled. The older man shot the younger man a glare that might have melted steel. "I don't need you telling me how to run this movement." The tension crackled in the air. Reporters scrambled to capture every second, cameras flashing. The owner realized these two had a power dynamic he'd only glimpsed on the plane. The older man was clearly in charge, but the younger man had doubts. Suddenly, the older man turned to the crowd. "We're going to keep fighting. This isn't the end." He pivoted, pointed at the owner. "Don't think this absolves you. We'll expose your lies." He marched off, pushing past protesters. A chunk of them followed, chanting once more. The younger man lingered, looking torn, then hurried after the older man. The demonstration broke into fragmented groups. Some trickled away, others stuck around, uncertain of what came next. The owner stood behind the police barricade, exhaling slowly. Myra signaled for him to return inside. In the lobby, he found a wave of employees nervously peering out the windows. He assured them everything was under control, though he felt anything but calm. The older man's final words echoed in his head. "We'll expose your lies." Later that afternoon, news outlets spun the event in different ways. Some framed it as a positive step. Airline CEO offers dialogue. Others showcase the older man's perspective. Activists demand accountability for alleged discrimination. Social media buzzed, with debates raging in comment sections. He retreated to his office, pulled off his tie, and sank into his chair. Myra quietly entered, a determined look on her face. "Police say the demonstration permit was for today only. The crowd's mostly dispersed." He rubbed his temples. "But they'll be back." She nodded. "Yes. Also, the older man, the one you heard on the plane, goes by the name Garland. He's been involved in several protests that turned violent. We don't have firm evidence that he's planning something like that here, but it's a possibility." He felt a pit in his stomach. "We have to prepare for the worst." Myra cleared her throat. There's a rumor they might show up at your philanthropic event next week, the one at the community center in the East District." He sighed. That event was close to his heart. They'd planned to announce new scholarships, new mentorship programs for high school kids. It was meant to uplift local communities. "Of course they'd pick that event," he muttered. "Anything to paint me as a fraud." That evening, as he drove home, he reflected on the complexities of the situation. The men behind him on the plane were driven by a cause they believed in, racial justice, a cause he actually supported. The problem was their suspicion, fueled by half-truths and perhaps real grievances that got twisted along the way. He recalled the younger man's uncertain eyes, how he'd looked torn between loyalty to the older man and the potential sincerity of the owner's offer. Maybe that was a sign. Maybe reason could still reach him. When the day of the community center event arrived, the atmosphere was both hopeful and tense. The building was decked out with balloons and banners celebrating achievements of local students. Security was tight, with uniformed guards stationed discreetly around the perimeter. Myra was there, overseeing everything. Inside, families gathered. Young people in neat outfits waited for scholarships, proud smiles on their faces. A local TV crew was on hand to cover the ceremony. In a smaller side room, a buffet of refreshments was laid out. He mingled, greeting well-wishers. But his eyes constantly scanned the edges of the room, aware that trouble could erupt. The formal program began with a speech by the local school principal, praising the new partnership with the Airline's foundation. Applause rippled through the hall. As soon as he stepped up to the podium to deliver his own remarks, the tension in the air spiked. He cleared his throat, looking at the bright, hopeful faces of the students in the front row. "Today is about opportunity," he began. "We're here to celebrate the achievements of these talented young people and to invest in their futures." Just then, a small group of protesters emerged at the back of the auditorium. In an instant, the atmosphere changed. Some onlookers gasped, uncertain whether this would get out of hand. The protesters held signs denouncing alleged discrimination. Among them, he spotted Garland, wearing the same intense scowl as before. The younger man hovered behind him, still looking conflicted. He paused, acknowledging the group. "I see we have guests who are concerned about our practices. I welcome you to listen to what we're doing here today. This isn't a publicity stunt. It's a genuine effort to empower our youth." Garland stepped forward, his voice reverberating through the hall. "Lies. You're only doing this to clean up your image. You don't care about these communities." A ripple of unease passed through the families. The kids in the front row looked confused, some frightened. The principal frowned, uncertain whether to intervene. He tried to keep his composure. "This scholarship program was started years ago, and we've expanded it annually." Garland raised a fist in the air. "You think a few scholarships can erase systemic injustice? I'm not claiming to fix everything with a few scholarships," he answered, forcing calm into his tone. "I'm saying this is one of many steps. I'm willing to collaborate with groups to identify more solutions." At that moment, a pair of security guards approached Garland, probably hoping to escort him out. Garland shook them off, raising his voice. "We have every right to be here. We're not trespassing. This is a public community center." A standoff loomed. Families looked alarmed. A few turned to leave. The principal, wanting to preserve order, whispered to the children to stay calm. He realized that forcibly removing Garland would validate the narrative that he silenced dissent. Instead, he gently motioned for the guards to step back. "Let him speak," he said quietly. Garland locked eyes with him, surprise flickering in his expression. Then he pressed his advantage, calling out to the crowd. "He's going to manipulate you. Don't be fooled. We have documents proving the airline doesn't hire from certain zip codes. He sighed inwardly. This again. Let's examine those documents, he said, gesturing to the stage. Show them to us. I'm not afraid of the truth. Garland paused. The younger man rifled through a backpack, pulling out a handful of papers. He hesitated, glancing from Garland to the owner. In the hush, it was clear even the protesters were uncertain. Finally, the younger man stepped onto the stage. Security tensed, but the owner shook his head, indicating it was okay. The younger man offered the papers, his hand trembling slightly. We have data that shows certain neighborhoods have fewer airline employees. We think it's because these areas are mostly people of color. He accepted the papers gently and scanned the lines of data. This is from 5 years ago, before our new hiring initiative. We've actually increased representation since then, with documented results. I can show you the updated stats. The younger man's voice dropped to a near whisper. But what if it's just for show? He turned to the young man, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. That's what I'm trying to clarify. If we're failing in some area, I want to fix it. I don't benefit from shutting out talent. I want the best people, from all backgrounds. A flicker of doubt passed over the younger man's face. Meanwhile, Garland advanced toward the stage, anger radiating from him. Don't listen to him. He's good with words. That's how these big shots fool everyone. The families in attendance stirred uneasily. Some of the scholarship recipients looked at Garland with frustration, as if he was spoiling their moment. A brave student raised her hand. "Sir," she said, directing her voice toward Garland, "I'm from one of those neighborhoods you claim is discriminated against. I got this scholarship. Are you saying I don't deserve it?" Garland opened his mouth, faltered, then spat out, "It's not about you personally." She gave him a level look. "You're interrupting our day. This is a big deal for us. If the airline is doing something right, shouldn't we encourage it?" Garland growled in frustration, uncertain how to respond. The younger man lowered his gaze, looking more conflicted than ever. The tension was thick enough to slice with a knife. Sensing that the crowd might turn on the protesters, the owner decided to show some empathy. "I understand your anger. Historic injustices are real. I'm not denying that. But let's not sabotage the efforts that are actually trying to help." The next words he spoke resonated throughout the room. "We need solutions, not shouting. Let's work together on a path forward." The younger man glanced at Garland, then back at the owner. "Is that real or just talk?" He extended his hand. "Let's find out. We can go through the numbers. We'll schedule a community meeting. We'll invite activists, local leaders, and my HR department. If we find evidence of discrimination, we'll fix it. If we don't, then we put this rumor to rest." An uneasy silence followed. The scholarship recipients watched, hopeful that the tension would diffuse. The security guards hovered near the edge of the stage, uncertain if they'd need to step in. Cameras from the local news recorded every detail. Garland's lips curled in contempt. "You're too slick for me to trust. But if you think I'm backing down, you're wrong." He grabbed the younger man's shoulder. "Come on, we're done here." The younger man locked eyes with the owner for a split second, something like apology flickering there. Then he let Garland pull him away. A few protesters followed, though some stayed behind, drawn to the possibility of working with the airline. After the group left, the owner addressed the shaken families. "I'm sorry for the disruption. Let's continue with what we came here for. Celebrating you." Applause broke out. Though the mood was tense, the program carried on. Cameras captured the awarding of scholarships, interviews with the recipients, and a statement from the principal praising the airline's commitment. In the days that followed, news segments replayed the confrontation, with pundits debating whether the airline was truly progressive or simply engaged in damage control. Social media continued to buzz, but a number of community members voiced appreciation for the scholarships and the owner's willingness to talk. Meanwhile, Myra continued to monitor Garland's group. They began planning another protest, but now there was division in the ranks. Some believed in giving the airline a chance to prove its diversity claims. Others wanted to keep up the pressure. Garland remained firmly in the extremist camp, insisting that any cooperation was a betrayal. The younger man was spotted attending a smaller meeting with the local activists who supported the community dialogue approach. It seemed he was starting to question Garland's hardline tactics. As the possibility of constructive dialogue grew, the owner arranged a formal community meeting in a neutral venue, a local civic hall known for hosting town halls. Invitations went out to activists, community leaders, and journalists. He personally called the pastor to serve as a moderator. The pastor agreed, believing it could be a turning point. The night of the meeting arrived. The auditorium was modest, with rows of folding chairs and a small stage at the front. A microphone stood ready. Armed with data and accompanied by a few of his HR personnel, the owner took his seat at a table on stage. The pastor sat in the middle, prepared to guide the discussion. One by one, community members filled the seats. Some came out of sheer curiosity, others with hope that real solutions could emerge. Garland's group filed in, their expressions wary. The younger man was among them, looking anxious. Garland eyed the stage with open hostility. When the pastor opened the floor, he called on the owner to summarize the airline's hiring and outreach policies. The owner explained their diversity goals, the steps taken to address past inequities, and the support structures for employees from underserved communities. He also acknowledged that no system was perfect. Then the pastor invited others to ask questions. A middle-aged woman spoke up, recounting how her application was ignored for months. An HR representative apologized and promised to look into it personally, explaining how the system might have mishandled her resume. A young college graduate asked about mentorship opportunities. The owner detailed a new internship program. Garland watched all this, arms folded. He refused to speak when offered the microphone, glaring as others engaged in conversation. Finally, the younger man raised his hand. Everyone turned to look at him. He stepped to the microphone, voice unsteady. "I was taught that corporations only pretend to care, but tonight, I'm seeing actual data and hearing from HR. I want to know one thing. If we find real cases of discrimination, will you fix them?" The owner leaned forward. "Absolutely. And not just fix them, implement policies to prevent them from happening again. We're open to third-party audits if necessary." A hush fell. People turned to Garland, expecting a response, but he stayed silent. The younger man nodded slowly, stepping away. The pastor spoke gently. "It seems there's a path for partnership. We'll keep each other accountable. Let's not allow anger or fear to overshadow the possibility of progress." The meeting ended with a cautious sense of optimism. A few reporters interviewed attendees, capturing quotes about the willingness to work together. Even some protesters expressed guarded hope. Garland stormed out, his loyalists trailing behind, but the younger man lingered, speaking quietly with a few activists. The owner could sense they were on the edge of something, a potential resolution or a deeper conflict. It all hinged on whether Garland's extremist approach would escalate, and whether the new lines of communication could hold. Days turned into a week. The airline's HR team followed up on complaints raised at the meeting, quickly addressing or disproving them with documentation. Public opinion began to soften. The story on local news shifted from condemnation to cautious praise for the airline's responsiveness. Then, in the midst of this fragile progress, Myra delivered alarming news. We have intel that Garland and a few followers are planning a direct action at your private hangar, possibly tonight. He tensed. A direct action. She gave a grim nod. Rumors say they want to vandalize one of your jets as a symbol. We don't know if it's just graffiti or something more dangerous. His stomach twisted. We can't let them near that plane. It could be a huge safety risk if they tamper with anything critical. Myra explained that security would be on high alert, but the hangar was in a quieter area of the airport, and sometimes staff were minimal overnight. She recommended discreetly increasing patrols. That night, the owner found himself unable to sleep. He decided to go to the hangar in person, despite Myra's concerns for his safety. He felt responsible for confronting these threats. Taking a small security detail, he arrived at the airport under cover of darkness, the neon lights illuminating the runways in endless rows. Inside the hangar, a sleek aircraft rested, awaiting maintenance checks. Security guards were stationed at various entry points. Myra was there, scanning video feeds from cameras around the perimeter. Hours ticked by with no sign of trouble. He began to suspect a false alarm or that Garland had changed tactics. Then, near midnight, movement flickered on one of the monitors. 3 figures approached the fence from a blind spot in the camera's coverage. Myra grabbed her radio, alerting the guards. They hurried to intercept. The owner followed, keeping a safe distance but wanting to witness whatever happened. The guards emerged from the hangar, flashlights bobbing. Beyond the fence, the 3 figures retreated into darkness. It looked like they were testing the security response. He frowned. "Do you think that was them?" Myra nodded grimly. "Probably. They might try another angle. Let's stay alert." Sure enough, about 30 minutes later, another camera caught movement along the opposite side of the fence. This time, 4 figures advanced under the cover of darkness. The security team split up, some heading that way while others guarded the perimeter. Tension coiled in his chest. If Garland wanted to send a message by defacing or damaging the plane, this was the moment. The owner stepped carefully through the dimly lit corridor near the hangar's side entrance, adrenaline pumping. Suddenly, he heard hushed voices. Pressing himself against a shadowed wall, he peeked around the corner. He recognized Garland's silhouette, the older man's frame distinctive under a hoodie. Next to him was a smaller figure holding a spray can, likely intent on graffiti. Garland whispered, "We get inside. Tag the plane. Smash the cockpit windows if we can. That'll make headlines." The smaller figure shuffled nervously. "What about the guards?" Garland's voice turned steely. "They can't watch everything. We'll be in and out before they catch us." The owner's heart pounded. He signaled to Myra's security detail, indicating Garland's location. They nodded, spreading out to encircle the intruders. Suddenly, a shout rang out. One of the security guards had discovered another figure trying to cut through a padlock. Garland cursed, realizing the element of surprise was gone. He hissed, "Scatter!" Chaos erupted as the 4 intruders split in different directions. The owner ducked behind a storage crate, hearing footsteps pound past him. A flashlight beam swung wide, revealing the younger man from before. He paused, spotting the owner. Recognition flashed in his eyes. They both froze. The younger man looked panicked, the spray can trembling in his hand. The owner kept his voice low. "Don't do this. It's not worth it." The younger man swallowed hard. He looked torn, eyes darting left and right. Then a burst of static crackled over a guard's radio and he bolted, sprinting across the hangar floor. Myra's team closed in from multiple angles. The younger man crashed into a toolbox, scattering wrenches and screwdrivers. He stumbled, and 2 guards converged on him. His spray can clattered across the concrete. He raised his hands in surrender, breathing hard. Across the hangar, Garland tried to slip away through a side exit, but more guards poured in, cornering him. He snarled in defiance, brandishing a crowbar, but realized he was outnumbered. Slowly, he lowered the weapon. By the time the police arrived, Garland and his accomplices were handcuffed, furious and silent. The younger man hung his head, regret etched on his face. The older man shot him a withering glare, as if blaming him for the failure. The owner remained near the shadows, letting the security team handle the situation. He felt a swirl of emotions, relief that the plane was safe, anger at the attempted vandalism, and sadness that it had come to this. Police escorted Garland and the others away. As the younger man was led past the owner, he managed to whisper, "I'm sorry, I just wanted to do something to help my community." The owner met his gaze. "I know, but destruction isn't the way." The young man's eyes brimmed with tears, though he quickly turned away, following the officers. In the aftermath, Myra breathed a sigh of relief. "We'll have to deal with the media spin on this," she said, "but at least we prevented any serious damage." He nodded, staring at the row of blinking lights on the runway. "I hope this ends it. Maybe now we can focus on real progress rather than fear." The next day, news of the attempted break-in at the airline's hangar broke. Some outlets labeled it an act of vandalism. Others called it a thwarted sabotage. Public opinion largely condemned the group's tactics. Calls for calm and dialogue dominated talk shows. Garland faced charges related to trespassing and attempted property damage. The younger man's involvement was less severe. He was charged with misdemeanor trespassing. Some activists distanced themselves from Garland, criticizing him for resorting to aggression. Meanwhile, the owner followed through on his promises for transparency. He invited local leaders to review hiring practices. He publicly reaffirmed the airline's commitment to diversity. Slowly, the narrative around his company began to shift from suspicion to a more balanced view. Months later, after multiple court hearings, Garland was sentenced to community service and probation. The younger man, who publicly apologized and cooperated with authorities, received a lighter sentence, plus mandatory community service. One day, as the owner was wrapping up a meeting at the community center, he saw a familiar face tidying up one of the recreational rooms, mopping the floor and stacking chairs. It was the younger man, fulfilling his court-ordered service. Their eyes met awkwardly. The owner approached slowly. "I didn't know you were assigned here." The younger man shrugged, glancing at the bucket of soapy water. "I asked to be placed in this center. Figured I might still do some good." They stood in silence for a moment, the echo of the past months hanging between them. He spoke gently. "I'm sorry it came to what it did. I never wanted to be the enemy." The younger man set down the mop, sighing. "I believed everything Garland said. I wanted to stand up for people in my neighborhood who feel powerless, but I got caught up in his anger. I should have looked at the facts." The owner nodded. "Passion is good, but it needs direction. If you ever want to talk about ways to help your community from the inside, my office door is open." A flicker of surprise crossed the younger man's face. "Really? After everything?" He offered a small smile. "Especially after everything. People grow. Mistakes can lead to understanding." The younger man's eyes filled with cautious hope. They shook hands, both aware it was a fragile truce, but one that might lead to better things. Months turned into a year. The airline's hiring program expanded, forging new partnerships with local schools and job fairs. The scholarship program flourished, and community outreach increased. Though racial bias was far from eradicated, tangible progress blossomed. The memory of that tense flight lingered in the owner's mind. He remembered how the entire ordeal began with him sitting incognito, overhearing a pair of passengers behind him. It had been frightening and unsettling, but ultimately it forced him to confront issues within his airline and within society. The confrontation paved the way for growth, for forging unexpected alliances. Looking back, he often marveled at how a random seat assignment had set these events in motion, how he'd heard Garland's cryptic statements and recognized the threat just in time. In the end, that flight became more than just a secret inspection of his airline's operations. It became a journey into the undercurrents of frustration, bias, and activism that ran through the world he thought he knew. He continued to fly incognito from time to time, though with a different perspective. Instead of just searching for operational flaws, he listened for stories of hope, anger, pride, pain, all woven together at 30,000 feet. And every time he disembarked, he was reminded that his business wasn't just about planes and profit margins. It was about people, each with their own narrative, aspirations, and struggles. He never forgot the day he stopped cold after hearing those two passengers. That moment set off a cascade of discoveries, forging new bonds and exposing hidden divides. In many ways, it had been the flight that changed his life, and maybe, just maybe, it changed a few others along the way as well. Did you enjoy this story of ambition, courage, and the power of one voice to spark change? Let us know in the comments. What part resonated with you the most, or which character's journey surprised you? We love hearing your thoughts. And if you want more stories like this, full of twists, heart, and inspiration, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's plenty more where this came from, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey.